To begin with, I'd like to borrow from the words of a famous Maui activist by the name of Kalekoa Kaeo. And he said that the military in the Pacific is like a monstrous he'e, which is the Hawaiian word for octopus. Its head is the Pacific Command, or the Indo-Pacific Command at Pearl Harbor. Its eyes are the mountaintop telescopes, the undersea sensors, and the satellite radar facilities. Its brain and nervous system is the supercomputers and now the 5G networks that are currently being launched into space. The dominion of the Indo-Pacific Command stretches from Alaska to Antarctica, from the Arabian Sea, which is west of India, all the way across the Bay of Bengal, across the Pacific, to both coasts, North and South of America. That is the comprehensive scope of what we're talking about. I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation now with share screen. How to hide empire in the 21st century. So calligraphy teaches us to see negative space. This character, for example, is more than the black mark. Good calligraphy is just as aware of the white space as the black space. The white space is not nothing. The ocean is also perceived as nothing to many people who are not trained to recognize the negative space. To see the ocean as nothing is highly inaccurate. Because of this misperception, people don't pay attention to what takes place in the ocean. As long as their focus is on the land, the military is able to get away with whatever it wants because it is invisible. So this presentation, How to Hide Empire, one of the ways is to make things take place in the ocean, not on land. For example, the Aegis missile launch system, which was the reason that the Jeju Navy base was built, was to accommodate ships that were rigged out with the Aegis missile system. That was because people in the military realized that if missiles were launched from ships at sea, nobody would know. They wouldn't get any complaints from people on the ground about having missiles deployed from their land because it would be happening at sea and the boats could move around. So though you may not sense it from Korea, where so much militarization and base building has been taking place, in the overview, there will be a decrease of the number of overseas bases. It will make the US military presence superficially less visible as it decreases the number of military bases overseas. However, it will continue to expand its footprint, not on land, but in the ocean and in space, which will lead to even more comprehensive control of the globe. The Pentagon's goal for the 21st century is to simultaneously be as invisible as possible, but more powerful than ever before. So let's take a look really quickly and briefly of a history of different technologies of war. So this was the Korean warship, the Turtle ship, that was created centuries ago, and it was a huge technological breakthrough in war and very famous for it. And it was like in the 1600s or so. Then in 1905, this is a drawing depicting the war between Russia and Japan, and you can see they're using bayonets. We move up about 50 years, and then we come to mid-20th century, and we see tanks. The way war in the 21st century will look like is this. These are unmanned drones. This is a swarm of unmanned drones. This is a technology that is all about power and reaching across all borders. It will reflect artificial intelligence, robotics, and global real-time communications with GPS. We are in the middle of this transformation now. It is inherently imperialistic because it transgresses all borders. It knows no limits of time or space. Here we see on the left General J. Raymond, commander of the Space Force, with Elon Musk, CEO of SpaceX. On the right is North America Aerospace Defense Command General Terence O'Shaughnessy. Elon Musk has been awarded multiple contracts by military related to satellite launching. The merging of private business with military is a characteristic of fascism. It enables deals to be conducted without transparency and behind closed doors. So this merging of civilian and military, private and public, is another example of more invisibility and hiding war in the 21st century. The recently formed Space Force is the embodiment of this new way of waging war. Its dominion is space, but also cyberspace. It is inextricably linked to nuclear power and nuclear weapons, because you need nuclear power in order to make these huge, it requires so much energy. It could be why Trump pulled out of all the disarmament treaties except for one when he was in office, because the Space Force was being formed. The Space Force is the ultimate tool of global domination and colonialism. The Space Force is the foundation of 21st century military. The military of the next century will be leaner, faster, strike harder, and be more widely distributed. Testing will be centered where I live in Hawaii, because all of the segments of the military, the Marines, the Navy, and the Air Force are all close there. They're close to Pearl Harbor, although this is true also of Guam, but Pearl Harbor isn't on Guam. In the middle of this picture, we see the former commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. His name is Phil Davidson. The Space Force will be most active in the Indo-Pacific region. It will be the operating system for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. The Pacific Deterrence Initiative is the new name for what we used to call the Pacific Pivot. The Pentagon agenda for the 21st century is a pure expression of technology-driven capitalism, militarism, and fascism. This will result in tremendous consumption of fossil fuel, enormous greenhouse gas emissions, irreversible damage to thousands of ecosystems, degradation of indigenous health and cultures, crippling impacts to ocean life, and species extinction. The power of the narrative. In order to build militarism on the ground, the US needs buy-in from the people of many different countries. It achieves this through narrative. The narrative is the most important tool in colonization. Whoever controls the narrative controls the world. This is how the US persuades other nations, such as Korea, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, and others, to allow facilities that serve the US space war agenda to be built on their territory. Now, this subordination that they demonstrate to the US agenda is equivalent to being colonized by the US. But we don't call it colonialism. The new narrative uses other language to hide the colonialism. Again, hiding war and empire in the 21st century. The new narrative uses the word partner instead of colony. It uses the word interoperability instead of subordination. It uses the words regional security all the time instead of imperialism. This is what we hear most frequently in order to justify the destruction of villages, communities, democracy, and environment. The narrative of regional security is repeated again and again. And then there are sub-narratives. In every country and community of the US-controlled Asia Pacific, there is a sub-narrative which supports the American fiction of regional security for that community. Colonization is bound in the fiction of regional security. For example, on Guam, this is a photograph of the Liberation Day parade. The sub-narrative in Guam comes from the history of post-World War II, the recapture of Guam by the US from the Japanese. They call this colonialization liberation, and they celebrate liberation every year at this parade. In Hawaii, we celebrate Statehood Day, but you can see that not everybody in Hawaii feels that they are Americans. And I'm talking about the Native Hawaiians who were basically annexed or have been illegally occupied since 1898. In California and New York, where I've also lived, we never celebrated Statehood Day, but in Hawaii, it's a big thing because that is the story that paves the way for colonization of land, water, air, and now space. So we humans, we are hardwired for narrative. It's in our DNA. It's where mythology, legends, and folk tales come from. Our earliest explanations for the universe, seen and unseen, macro and micro. The power of the narrative to control the world is reflected in the amount of money spent each year by the Pentagon on PR. The Pentagon spends $1 billion a year for the narrative, and they pay 5,000 employees who work for them to create that narrative. Here is a typical report put out by the Pentagon to justify their imperialism. You open it up, a message from the Secretary of Defense. I highlighted the term at the bottom, rules-based international order. This is also another term that we're hearing over and over again when the US talks about justifying their aggression toward China. They say it's because China does not respect a rules-based order. However, interestingly enough, this is Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister from Russia, who recently responded, and I quote, "The concept of the rules-based order is advanced as a substitute for international law. It should be noted that international law already has a body of rules, but rules agreed at universal platforms and reflecting consensus of broad agreement. The West's goal is to oppose the collective efforts of all members of the world community with other rules, developed in closed, non-inclusive formats, and then imposed on everybody else. We only see harm in such actions that bypass the UN and seek to usurp the only decision-making process that can claim global relevance." Here's a great quote from Arundhati Roy. Once weapons were manufactured to fight wars. Now wars are manufactured to sell weapons. This is in London. It's a trade show. The narrative of the rules-based order is an opportunity for the US to manufacture and sell more arms. Because the global economy has been facing chronic stagnation, the war industry is the easiest way for the wealthy to continue to expand their wealth. The war industry relies on social control and repression to exist, like what we are seeing on an almost daily basis at Sosongri. And now that it will be driven by the new digital technologies, our challenges will be tougher as activists, because these digital technologies are not yet set in place by any means. Now is the moment to intervene. Here's another example of a narrative put out by the United States to demonize China and Russia. Here's a graphic of China arms spending. It was presented to Congress by the Indo-PACOM to try to convince our lawmakers that China possesses far more weapons than the US. This is absolutely false. For example, the Indo-PACOM briefing that this graph was shown at does not show that the US has any ballistic missile submarines in the Pacific, even though 8 US Pacific-based ballistic missile submarines play a central role in targeting China. Just 2 of these Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines can carry more warheads than China has in its entire nuclear stockpile. This image shows the USS Pennsylvania during a port visit to Guam in 2016. The new infrastructure to support space-based war will be extremely costly to build. For this reason, an elaborate narrative to justify it is in play. This is Missile Defense Agency Director, Vice Admiral John Hill, telling Congress that Russia and China are building ballistic hypersonic cruise missiles to fly over air defense sensors and below ballistic missile sensors. He said, quote, "There will never be enough terrestrial-based sensors to track maneuvering missiles in large numbers. If we are to outpace the threat, we need a persistent, space-based global sensor capacity." What that means is that we need funding for radar tracking stations on the land, on ships, and in space. This means constant spending, constant building, and we haven't built very much of any of that yet. We are just at the beginning. So fasten your seatbelts for what's in store, and let's fight this. One of the main manufacturers of this sort of technology, as many of us know, is Raytheon, who built the THAAD missile system that we are resisting right now at Sosongri. Lloyd Austin, in mid-March, who is our defense secretary, called the behavior of the farmers and residents of Sosongri, quote, "unacceptable as an alliance," because they were protesting. As a result, for the next 2 weeks, between his statement and a meeting between South Korean officials at the White House and the Biden administration, there was an increase in police crackdowns and police abuse of the residents of Sosongri. This was because of Lloyd Austin's remark. Here's Lloyd Austin. He used to be on the board of Raytheon, the manufacturer of the THAAD. In the first 3 months in his position as defense secretary, he awarded over $2.36 billion in contracts to Raytheon. In again, we see the former Indo-PACOM commander named Phil Davidson. He left only about 2 weeks ago, and the reason I show him both times is because he has been a very key architect in the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. In a speech at a Navy conference a few weeks ago, Davidson requested for investments to fund a network of training ranges across the region where all of the armed services can train together from many countries to practice the kind of tech-centric war that will dominate the future. Right now, this is a rough snapshot of the places where many of these war games are practiced, the biggest ones. But once we get the satellites in place and the kind of war that's being planned for the 21st century, this will just be like kindergarten. It will be, there will be so much more. There will be so many more weapons. There will be hypersonic. It will be so much bigger than this. This will look like the Korean turtle ship. It is no coincidence that it is now the Indo-Pacific Command that will be the first to implement war from space. That is the only way to be able to coordinate weapons that need to cross a distance that covers half a planet. In order for the US on one side of the planet to dominate China on the other side, it is best achieved by satellite. Empire by 5G. The US is developing a single network of fully integrated ground forces, special operations, cyber force, space force, all backed up by long-range fires. That's the ability to shoot missiles at least 500 miles minimum. Former Indo-PACOM Commander Davidson said these forces and their systems need to be meshed together permanently. This is why there has been such a focus on standardizing 5G. The Space Force is the ultimate expression of imperial goals. If you think about nature, nature has two hard boundaries, hard restrictions, time and space. It keeps the planet alive, that all of nature has been able to respect those boundaries. However, the language of digital technology, which is the language of the Space Force, has 4 inherent qualities that are optimal for military strategy and victory. 1, digital technology eradicates nature's boundary of time. 2, digital technology eradicates nature's boundary of space. 3, digital technology centralizes control and surveillance of communications. And 4, algorithms are invisible. Again, hiding empire in the 21st century. So I'm going to stop sharing here just to describe, to give you an analogy of what this transformation means. In the US, we used to have many bookstores. We called it the brick and mortar economy. Then digital technology was invented, which enabled online shopping, which eradicated the restrictions of time and space. Once people were able to shop at any time from any place, the brick and mortar stores all closed down. Today, it's very rare to see a bookstore in the United States. It doesn't mean that books are no longer selling. It just means that the infrastructure has transformed from brick and mortar to cyberspace. The Pentagon is currently planning on shutting down many of our brick and mortar bases overseas. The infrastructure of militarism is in an historic period of transition from physical bases to cyberspace. Sorry. The brick and mortar base is not only expensive, it is easy for the enemy to target, and it is bound by the restrictions of time and space. If one small computer can hold thousands of bulky, heavy books, the same applies to war. There's no need for the huge, expensive 20th century style military base anymore. Instead, we will see a network on many islands and many places in the world and on many ships of missile tracking radar, missile deployment facilities, rocket launch pads, and runways. Not all the big bases will shut down, though. Certain bases, like Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek, the largest US overseas base in the world, will remain because of their supreme importance close to China. They need a physical presence there. We will also see client states of the US, like Korea, like Japan, like the Philippines, provide their facilities as if they are their own facilities for maintaining mutual regional security, quote unquote. Control will be wielded either from a cloud, the cloud in cyberspace, or from behind the phony shell of a client state's government, like the SDF bases, like the Jeju Navy base. It's really for American empire, but it's hiding, again, hiding empire in the 21st century. This is the imperialism of the future, and it has not very little of the physical infrastructure that we have been familiar with till now. A virtual command in the cloud, that is the Space Force. It's interconnected invisibly. It will provide far more comprehensive global domination. The footprint is much lighter. The barbed wire, non-existent. But the domination, more ubiquitous and forceful than ever. I'm going to do another share screen. This is warfare of the future. The Marines are focusing on moving away from traditional artillery and moving towards using tactical vehicle. This is a drone swarm. It's all unmanned. What you're seeing is all unmanned. They want to use tactical vehicles that can fire missiles to sink ships that have longer ranges. The technological applications currently being tested are drones and robots. These are photographs of tests taking place right now off the coast of San Diego. The Marines are working with private sector firms to test the use of unmanned ships that can travel up to 500 miles, the use of unmanned vehicles that transit near shore areas onto the shore. Marine generals are looking to do things with as few troops as possible. By 2030, the plan indicates that the Marine Corps will have more than 100 long-range unmanned surface vessels in the fleet, performing surveillance and strike missions using small, armed, precision-guided drones capable of loitering over targets and then crashing into them like a bullet or a small bomb. The vision for the 21st century Air Force will be the ability to launch, recover, and maintain planes away from its main air bases and instead at unorthodox locations like partner nations, military airfields, or civilian airports. So an example of that, it's called, there's a name for that, rapid dispersal actions or something like that. And they've been doing exercises in Guam to practice this new strategy. Aircraft gathered at Andersen Air Force Base and were required to rapidly disperse to other airfields located on other islands nearby: Guam, Tinian, Saipan, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau. This spreads out the footprint, and it makes it more difficult for a heat-seeking missile, or for it makes it more difficult to target the US and to target Guam. It also, in the same way that you can disperse from being a target, it also enables you to gang up on a target. Like if you see a Chinese ship, you can immediately call through all of the sensors and the satellites. You can immediately call submarine, ballistic submarine with a torpedo. You can call helicopter. You can call a B-52 with a bomb. You can call everything, a missile coming in from Kauai or Kwajalein or wherever, or Jeju or SDF base simultaneously, because they're all connected by 5G. So this is what's being practiced. It's very still much in the experimental stage, but where the focus is. It's made possible by satellite and digital warfare. So the militarism of the future is being designed to spread thinly over the entire Pacific Ocean with less heavy brick and mortar bases. I'm sorry about the really bad resolution. I got this out of a Pentagon document that was boasting about a practice going on right now called Project Convergence 21. This fall, Project Convergence War Games will host the Air Force, Navy, Marines, and Special Operations in a transcontinental scenario in North America. It is meant specifically to duplicate the distance between Jeju Island and the southernmost part of the Philippines, what we call the first island chain. The military calls this the Great Power War, the war that they anticipate will be fought. This practice is an experiment to see what technologies actually work before they try to lock down how a future, quote, joint all-domain command and control network, end quote, what that should be, according to military officials. Project Convergence 2021 will link this fall Washington State on the left all the way to North Carolina on the right. I took a map of the US and I measured it and I compared it to the distance of the first island chain. And this is the area that they are now practicing to be able to control militarily through 5G and digital technology with Project Convergence 21. So, foreign policy, diplomacy, how does America do it? Foreign policy America style. Well, they want to accelerate. This is what they have said. They think it's accelerating weapons sale is the best way for them to make allies. This is the purpose of war games, of the Quad, which you'll learn about, which is an alliance of the United States, India, Australia, and Japan. They want to make those 4 countries, or they want to make Australia, Japan, and India be sort of like the Israel of the Middle East, but 3 of them to uphold American agenda in Asia. It will, number 2, place financial burden of the foreign base on the host country so that they have to pay the troops. They have to pay for the American footprint there. Number 3, building bases under flag of a non-US country to implement US agenda, like the SDF bases, like the Jeju base, as well as expand visiting forces agreement, like in the Philippines, also in Australia. And also number 4, ignore the UN instead of institute the concept of the rules-based order. And 5, ignore the 1967 law prohibiting the colonization of space that was introduced by an American either within the US or within the UN. I can't remember. I need to check on that. That's why I don't want this going out, because there's some stuff I need to check on. Okay, here we have Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense on the left, and Prime Minister Modi of India. They met, as you can tell, during the pandemic. The focus is on India to make them be a partner in what I described as the Quad Alliance. The Biden administration is looking at deepening its military and technical cooperation with India by not only providing it with arms and equipment, but also to help it develop its own defense or weapons industry. I remember in 2015, I was horrified that Obama signed a contract for manufacturing companies in India to produce jet engines and aircraft carriers for the United States and opened up a US office or an office in the Pentagon called the India Rapid Reaction Cell. The whole purpose of this office was to speed up and expedite weapons sales to India. In 2018, the US Strategic Framework for the Indo-Pacific is a declassified document that I was reading, and it indicated that we, the US, need to nuclearize India. Here is a copy of the document. You can see at the top that what the agenda is: build a stronger foundation for defense cooperation and interoperability, expand our defense trade and ability to transfer defense technology to enhance India's status as a major defense partner, increase our cooperation on shared regional security concerns, and encourage India's engagement beyond the Indian Ocean region, which means they're encouraging them to be a mini colonizer, support India's membership in the Nuclear Suppliers Group. So meanwhile, this is India today. This is not a country that has the money to be buying arms from the United States. So I was curious and I looked up how much did India spend on weapons last year. They spent $50 billion. Most of it went to the United States, but not all. And then I looked up how much did they spend on their healthcare system, $30 billion. You can tell by the way so many people, nobody was untouched by death in the recent spike in the COVID pandemic. So the plan is to implement technology with the focus on AI, drones, robots, standardizing 5G and interoperability. To do this, there are two main actions. Make sure that the civilian international rules on 5G can accommodate military use. This offsets cost and blurs the line between civilian and military, which reduces transparency. And conducting war games by selling arms and practicing interoperability. This is a drone with a 5G device attached to it. They are taking place, they are now practicing using 5G as a way to be the foundation for command and weapons control. This is taking place at the White Sands Missile Range in the United States. They're using the drone because the 5G is not yet in place, but the weapons are in place. So they have to put the 5G up so they can do the practice. And once the satellites are up, then they won't need the drone hanging there. International telecommunications standards will set the stage for future electronic warfare. So the US is actively engaged in writing those right now at the United Nations. The Pentagon has heavily invested in understanding and developing 5G. According to a Pentagon official, quote, Department of Defense sees a huge opportunity to leverage 5G capabilities and cost efficiencies of the technology for a worldwide range of Department of Defense operations. So they're saying, yeah, we want the public to pay for this, get it up in the air, in the space, and then we get to benefit from it to wage war. An example, or anyway, let me just move on here. So this is a war game in Australia, Talisman Sabre. Interoperability, it's the ability for militaries from different countries to work together on the same communications system and with the same culture, protocols, procedures, commands, and compatible equipment. This is like many countries all playing the same video game designed by the US. The only difference is it is not a video game. This is real war practice that continues all over the Pacific now, year round. It is so incredibly destructive to Mother Earth, and you'll see that in a moment. In order to achieve interoperability, armies must practice war exercises with each other. Each year, new weapons are introduced by manufacturers like Gucci or Apple iPhones. Each year, the armies need to practice on the new line of weapons. So it's an endless cycle of military manufacture, practice, even during peacetime. Further, interoperability is actually a very nice way of saying colonized, because the objectives, the culture, the language, the algorithms are all determined by the Pentagon. When a country buys arms from the US, these weapons are calibrated to be compatible with the larger system determined by the US. It's like buying an Apple versus buying a PC. The consumer is tied to a certain standard of compatibility. According to the 2019 Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, they said that foreign military sales, foreign weapons sales is, quote, the tool of first resort in strengthening our alliances and attracting new partners, end quote. Foreign military sales increased by more than 65% between 2016 and 2019. This leads to devastation to land, oceans, air, and communities. The extensive chains of Pacific islands that ring China have been described as a wall, a barrier to be breached by an attacker or strengthened by a defender. They are seen from a military point of view as springboards, potential bases for operations, either to attack or invade others in the region. In a territorial sense, they are benchmarks marking the extent of a country's influence in that region. And I'm so sorry that Emily couldn't be with us today because she's from Taiwan, and I've been wanting to talk to somebody from Taiwan because right now, the first island chain where most of us are familiar with or live, it's controlled by the US. So you see why Taiwan is so controversial. We hear what China says about Taiwan. We hear what the US says about Taiwan. I want to hear what the people in Taiwan are saying about Taiwan. And we need more activists from Taiwan to talk with us, because that is the apple, the prize that these two countries are fighting for, because that will give influence over the whole first island chain. It's a huge geostrategic hotspot. Okay, the first island chain, Jeju, Okinawa, Amami Oshima, Ishigaki, Miyakojima, Yonaguni, and Taiwan. I call what's going on the first island chain the Jejufication of the first island chain, because what has happened to Jeju-do is starting to happen on the other islands. This are the planned military installations or recently completed for Jeju. We've been seeing so much suffering, sacrifice, resistance on Jeju. Here we see Okinawa. We heard from Suzuyo Takasato about how the bottom of Henoko Bay was so soft that they needed so much more dirt to fill in with landfill, much more than they expected. So they started quickly looking for dirt and scraping up dirt where they could. And they ended up taking a contract with this landfill company that took dirt from a battlefield where many ancestors died and their bones are. And this dirt is combined with crushed bones of countless people who sacrificed themselves in the Battle of Okinawa. And so now the Okinawan people are beside themselves as their bones of their ancestors are being used to fill in the bay for a base they've been protesting for decades. In Miyakojima, this is the ammunition depot that they're building. This is a beautiful, beautiful island, and look what they've done. Ammunition means nukes, weapons, missiles going to China. Here are the people of Ishigaki protesting, sorry about the bad resolution. Meanwhile, on their island on Ishigaki, they're unloading Patriot missiles for the newly constructed base. In Yonaguni, protests. This is the site where the missile base, the satellite radar tracking station is. We visited this site. These are endemic horses called Yonaguni horses. This is the only place, this is where they're from. The missile site, the missile tracking site is built over their watering hole of these wild horses. I don't know where they got water from anymore, but it's covered where they used to get water. It doesn't look like this anymore. This is Amami Oshima. This was the most incredibly dense first generation virgin forest I've ever seen. I visited there in 2015. You can see the clear cutting to build one of 2 missile bases on that island. In the lower right-hand corner is a beautiful, beautiful beach called Katoku Beach. Incredible. They're going to build a seawall. If you know anything about seawalls, it is very, very bad for erosion. Here's another picture of Katoku Beach right near the base. So they're going to build a wall. They're going to destroy the beach and just build a concrete wall. I don't know why. Maybe they'll build a harbor here to bring in supplies. I have no idea why they would build a seawall here. So second island chain is the Mariana Islands. It's all, so you see the Marianas to the right, there's Saipan, Hagatna, Guam. Above that are also the Bonin Islands, or also called the Ogasawara Islands. But I'm only going to talk about the Mariana Islands because even though this is a really long presentation, I need to explain how the most devastation slated for the Pacific is slated for the Mariana Islands. It's shocking. The Mariana Islands are the main island group in the second island chain. It is politically divided into 2 governments. Guam, you can see, Guam at the very bottom. And then all the islands above is the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, culturally, they are exactly the same. They share families, but like Korea, they were divided by outside forces. Unlike Korea, though, both Guam and what we call the CNMI, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, are colonial subjects to the US. Though they're divided, they're both subjects to the US, but they have different political contracts, and it keeps them from unifying in solidarity. So the US is able to fully exploit this island chain and is in the process of transforming them into the center of US military power in the Pacific. Decision-making will come out of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but sheer brute force, including nukes, missile deployment, radar tracking, and year-round war exercises and explosions on land, on sea, underwater, and bombs dropped from the air on these islands will continually damage this place, which is one of the most beautiful and biodiverse places on Earth. 26 species of dolphins and whales are going to suffer greatly here. These are the projects that are slated for this area. Each one is so huge, each one of these. And the fact that all of these are being planned, it takes your breath away. It makes you faint. Here they're broken down into what these activities will be. You can just see it goes on, and this is not even all of it. The activities will take up this space here of this square. This is the equivalent area equal to that of the entire nation of India. India is not a small country. It's huge. The waters surrounding the Marianas are slated to become the ultimate playground of doom, where biodiverse ecosystems will be subjected to endless torrents of bombs, bullets, shells, sonar, underwater torpedoes, landmines, and missiles. The area, like I said, is larger than India. This is the most diverse, the most concentrated spot for whales and dolphins in the world. The Navy projects in the EIS that it will kill over 81,000 whales and dolphins a year. Okay. I'm going to show you some bombing practice that has been taking place for a while there on one of the islands, and it's a tiny, tiny sample. A tiny, tiny sample. Oh, this is not the one. Hold on.
I noticed the time also. So,
oh, okay.
If you're ready,
I can stop now.
Wrap up at some point.
Okay.
I'm not sure how long this video is.
I'm gonna. This video is like 1 minute. This is an island that used to be a major fishing spot and a landing spot for migratory birds. Many migratory birds land on this island. It violated the Migratory Bird Act, what was taking place here, and Earth Justice won a legal lawsuit, but Congress exempted the military from having to follow the Migratory Bird Act. So now they've been dropping 2,150 bombs on this island called Farallon de Medianita, or FDM. They're going to start dropping 6,000 bombs a year now instead of 2,150. I think I can just wrap it up, since, I mean, I was going to show just all the war exercises taking place, but I think you get the idea. Well, let me show you just really briefly what Guam and the Marianas looks like, just so you know what's being destroyed. Well, this is Tinian, and this is the plans for Tinian. That's nearby. That's Tinian, and that they're going to use half the island for live fire training. That's Pagan. It's an island that's so beautiful. There's no people, there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's nothing. It's perfectly pristine. You can walk into the reef and pick up a lobster, and you can just pick up your food. It's teeming with fish and everything. They're going to use this whole island for bombing practice. This is the reef in Pagan Island. You might have heard of Pagan Island. This is another shot of Pagan Island. It's only 2 miles long. And it's got everything. It's got freshwater lakes. It's got a live volcano. They're going to use the live volcano for dropping bombs, for bombing practice. It's got incredible diversity that's found only on the island. There's a picture from above. This is a reef in Saipan that will be impacted, not a reef, a mangrove forest. These are the latte stones that is the symbol of the Mariana Islands. These are the pillars that used to hang up, support the housing for the indigenous people. They were all plowed over in order to build these live fire ranges here. And this is where there will be live fire practice. This is the most sacred part of Guam, which is already destroyed by militarism. This was the last place left. People have been fighting tooth and nail to save it. They are not succeeding because Guam is a colony. They're having even less luck than the people of Jeju, if you can believe that. Here's the reef at Litexin, also called Retidian. Some baby turtles there. This is from the land of how it looks in the ocean, but it doesn't look like this anymore. Now it looks like this. They've turned this into Camp Blas. It's a base. This is going to be where the headquarters for the live fire range are. In doing this, they bulldozed an ancient village called Magwak Village. This is it from above. The latte stones were bulldozed, as were the remains of 3,000 bodies. They shuffled them together. They put them in cardboard boxes. They're in offices throughout Guam. They have no obligation to be transparent at all because Guam is a colony. The people are beside themselves that all of these remains have just been shelved on boxes. Here's a woman comforting another woman about what's going on. Protesters. Anyway, I could go on. It's even worse than this, but I'm going to stop now.